Hello, my dear masterminds. If you ever saw yourself the way they see you, my dear, you wouldn't question your worth for another second. You wouldn't doubt your power, your presence, your instincts, or the way a room shifts the moment you walk through it. You'd finally understand why people hesitate when they speak to you, why their voice changes, why their energy glitches for a split second, why they go quiet after you answer a question with 3 calm words. Because in their story, you're not the side character. You're not the background NPC. You're not the maybe one day friend or the disposable extra. No, in their mind, you are the blueprint they measure themselves against, the standard they'll never reach, the original they try to copy but can't replicate. You influence people without opening your mouth. You inspire them by simply existing, and that creates unease in them, not because you're trying to, not because you're showing off. It's because there's something original about you, something they can't categorize, can't duplicate, can't reverse engineer with normal logic. You move with a certain gravity, a depth, a knowing. And people who aren't used to authentic strength mistake it for arrogance. They think you're unreachable because they can't reach your frequency. They think you're complex because they've only known simple. They think you're quiet because they don't understand the power of someone who doesn't need noise to set the standard. They study you. They monitor you. They glance at you when you're not looking. They replay your reactions in their head, trying to decode your approach, your style, your energy, your methods. And the part that creates the most unease in them, they can study all they want. They'll never be able to replicate what came from your unique journey. Your silence was your strategy, not your weakness. In their eyes, you're the template, the reference point, the measuring stick, the person they pull up when they need to remind themselves what real looks like. You're the reminder that real strength doesn't announce itself. It emanates. Real power doesn't perform. It presides. Real presence doesn't chase. It commands. They pretend they're not watching, but their body language exposes them every time. They mimic your tone when you're not around. They adopt your phrases months later. They shift their style after seeing yours. They compare themselves to you constantly. They wonder how you always seem to set trends without even trying. They can't see the challenges you've fought privately. They can only feel the aftermath of someone shaped through pressure, appearing in their ordinary little world. If you saw yourself through their eyes for even 5 seconds, you'd understand why they copy, why they study, why they orbit, why they mimic, why they talk about you constantly but can't quite capture your essence. You'd understand that you're not a source of unease because you're a threat. You're a blueprint, the kind that shows them what they could be if they had your courage, your journey, your truth. And that's why, in their story, you don't just appear out of nowhere, you appear exactly when they need a reminder of what authentic looks like. When people talk about you, they never admit the real reason they act strange around you. They'll blame your confidence, your style, your choices, your path, anything that sounds socially acceptable. But deep down, they know the truth. They didn't just meet you. They met their standard. You became the measuring stick they compare every decision to. Something about your presence, your calm, your awareness, your authenticity made them realize how much of themselves they'd compromised. That's why they react the way they do. That's why they stutter. That's why they take notes. That's why they watch you out of the corner of their eye. They're trying to figure out how someone like you exists in a world full of people who copy each other in circles, never landing on an original thought. You have that mirror effect, the kind that forces people to see their own limitations, their own shortcuts, their own lack of originality, their own unease with standing alone, and nobody likes seeing that reflection. Especially not people who've built their entire personality on being a slightly better version of someone else's idea. So what do? They label you as too different, too confident, too independent, too hard to figure out. But all those labels are just translations for one thing. You make me uneasy because you remind me I'm still following someone else's blueprint. You're the blueprint in their story because you expose what they're not, without even trying. Their borrowed confidence unravels around you. Their copied personas fade. Their recycled habits look obvious. Their secondhand opinions become embarrassing. Their unease shows. Their ego realizes it's been performing. They can feel you operating from a place of authenticity they've never accessed. They can feel your energy coming from a source they can't tap into. They can feel your presence rooted in something earned, not borrowed. Not because you're arrogant, but because you've built your identity through challenges, through obstacles they never even knew you endured. Most people only meet others who are variations of the same template, same unease, same references, same borrowed confidence, same recycled thoughts. But when they met you, they met someone who built themselves from scratch, someone who evolved without a manual, someone who learned through lived experience, someone who grew beyond imitation. And that's why you unsettle them. Because you represent an original they could never become. No matter how many traits they try to borrow, you don't react like they expect. You don't get affected when they test you. You don't need their approval when they withhold it. You don't follow. You don't copy. You don't conform. Your authenticity feels unsettling to them. Your originality feels like quiet rebellion. Your independence feels like reflection, and your silence feels like depth, even when you're not comparing yourself to anyone. If you saw yourself through their eyes, you'd finally understand why they keep you close while secretly studying your every move. You're not just another person in their life. You're the standard they measure themselves against, the original they wish they'd been brave enough to be, the truth they keep avoiding, the test of their own authenticity. You ever notice how the loudest voices suddenly get quiet when you enter? How the most confident people suddenly start explaining themselves when you're in the room? It's because you disrupt their performance. You don't respond the way copies respond. You don't fall for the recycled lines. You don't give them the validation they're looking for. You don't play into their borrowed personas. You don't explain yourself using their language. And worst of all, you don't need their world to make sense of yours. You are unreadable. And in a world full of people who built themselves by reading others, that makes you feel legendary. They don't know if you approve or disapprove, if you're impressed or indifferent, if you're aware of their imitation or simply unbothered. That uncertainty keeps them uneasy. People crave recognition from their reference points. They want to know you see them. They want to know they're close to your level. They want to know they've successfully copied the assignment. But you don't hand out grades. You don't acknowledge the imitation. You don't validate the performance. You stay in your own lane, and that lane was paved by you alone. And the deeper truth, you've lived too much to perform. You've learned too much to pretend. You've endured too much to cosplay strength. You learned early that authenticity is power, that being original is protection, that being yourself is the strategy. You became the blueprint in their story, not because you demanded to be, but because you carry an energy that can't be faked, bought, or borrowed. They copy because they can't create like you. They watch because they can't innovate like you. They study because they want to decode how you remain original in a world of repetition. When someone can't replicate you, they fixate on you. When they can't match you, they mimic you. When they can't understand you, they orbit you. And that fixation, it's not about you, it's about what you represent. You represent the courage to be original, the strength to stand alone, the confidence to be undefined. You represent freedom from needing to fit in. You represent the possibility they're too uneasy to chase. You represent the version of themselves they abandon to feel safe. That's why people switch up so fast. That's why they act different when you enter a room. That's why they treat you like something rare even though you're just being yourself. You are the blueprint because you challenge their borrowed existence just by being authentic. And they know, deep down, that every mask they wear would soften if they stood next to you too long. You don't have to call them out. Your authenticity alone highlights the performance. There's a moment, a very specific moment, when people finally understand who they're dealing with. It doesn't happen when you win. It doesn't happen when you speak. It doesn't happen when you prove yourself. It happens in the quiet, in the split second when your authentic presence outshines their entire performance. In the moment when they try to impress you and you remain centered. In the moment when they expect you to follow and you don't move an inch. In the moment when they try to make you feel small and you simply exist in your own magnitude. That's when it clicks for them. You were never in their competition. You were never trying to be like them. You were never following their template. You were never seeking their blueprint. You were simply being, and that's more powerful than anything they've been performing. Because they realized they weren't dealing with another copy. They were dealing with an original. Someone who operates from lived truth, not borrowed confidence. Someone who moves from authentic power, not performed strength. Someone who learned who they are, not from trends, not from crowds, not from validation, but from endurance, from silence, from rebuilding themselves when no one was watching. People feel uneasy around that kind of authenticity, the kind you can't study and replicate, the kind you can't shape, the kind you can't search for, the kind you can't buy. They thought they could decode you because you seemed calm. They thought you were simple because you didn't perform. They thought you were easy to understand because you didn't need complexity to feel deep. But when the truth hit, when they finally saw the depth you came from, everything shifted. Now they understand why your simplicity felt profound, why your calm felt earned, why your presence felt original, why your energy felt impossible to replicate. You don't perform because you don't need to. You don't explain because you don't owe anyone your journey. You don't compete because there's no one in your category. You don't compare because you built yourself, not borrowed yourself. And somewhere deep in their mind, a realization sets in. A realization they'll never say out loud. I've been trying to copy the wrong person. I thought I could imitate them, but they're an original. I thought I understood them, but I've never understood myself. That's when they switch up, not out of respect, not out of loyalty, but out of the humbling that comes from recognizing they just met someone who doesn't follow templates, someone who doesn't need validation, someone who walks with an aura built from truth, not performance. You are the awakening in their story. the person they couldn't copy no matter how hard they tried. You were the original in a world of remixes, the blueprint in a sea of drafts. People swear you changed, but that's not the truth. You didn't switch up. Their eyes opened. You've always been this authentic, this original, this grounded, this self-made. But they couldn't see any of that before because they were too busy projecting what they wanted you to be. They wanted you easier to read. They wanted you easier to copy. They wanted you predictable. They wanted you explainable. They wanted you simple enough to imitate and familiar enough to replicate. But then, something happened that they never saw coming. Their own attempts to copy you revealed how original you actually are. Their imitation highlighted your authenticity. Their performance revealed your truth. Their pretend layers highlighted your face. Their fakeness forced them to stare at the reality they tried to avoid. You were never playing their game. You were simply being yourself. And that's a level most people never reach. Now they see the things they ignored, the way you don't perform, the way you don't follow, the way you don't need trends to feel current, the way you don't need approval to feel valid, the way you can stand alone and still feel complete, the way you rebuild yourself from your own materials, the way you rise without imitating anyone else's path. These aren't traits you studied. These are traits you earned through trials they've never faced. And now that they finally see all this, they're overwhelmed, they're humbled, they're unsure. Because you didn't become original to impress them. You became yourself because anything else would have been a betrayal. You're the blueprint in their story because you've accessed depths they've only performed. You've built foundations they've only rented. You've strengthened wounds they've only covered. Your authenticity didn't come from wanting to be different. It came from refusing to be anyone but yourself. That's why your presence resonates like truth now. That's why your energy feels rare. That's why your aura feels like something they can't manufacture. They finally realize the person they tried to copy is the same person they can't replicate. The person they tried to understand is the same person who defies their categories. The person they thought they could mimic is the same person who remains irreplaceable. The person they dismissed as simple is the same person who became unrepeatable. And here's the part that truly humbles them. You didn't build yourself to be admired. You didn't craft yourself to be copied. You didn't create yourself to be a template. You simply became who you needed to be. And that authenticity became the blueprint others wish they had the courage to follow. You're not performing in their story. You're the lesson. You're the standard. You're the reminder that they've been living as drafts of other people's ideas. You didn't change. They just finally saw you without their projections. Their need to categorize, their unease with originality blocking the view. There's a version of you they always sensed but refused to acknowledge. The version that didn't need templates, didn't need permission, didn't need to fit in, didn't need anyone's path to walk. And even when they pretended not to notice, that version of you was already making them uneasy. They felt it before they understood it. They sensed it before they could name it. They knew you had something unrepeatable, something they couldn't study, couldn't borrow, couldn't manufacture. But they told themselves it wasn't real. They told themselves you were just lucky, naturally gifted, or born that way. Anything to avoid admitting that your authenticity came from choosing yourself over and over again, even when it was lonely. Because here's the truth they've been avoiding. You didn't come from a template. You didn't come from a manual. You didn't come from copying what worked for others. You came from trials, the kind that forces you to develop yourself from scratch. You came from silence, the kind that teaches you to trust your own voice. You came from isolation, the kind that shows you who you are when no one's watching. You came from endurance, the kind that builds authenticity others can only imitate. They can't compete with that. They can't replicate that. They can't pretend that in front of someone real, and you are the realest thing they've encountered. The minute someone performing meets someone authentic, the performance unravels. That's what happened when they met you. They didn't feel uneasy because of your confidence. They felt uneasy because of your authenticity. They didn't feel uneasy because of your strength. They felt uneasy because of your originality. They didn't feel uneasy because of your silence. They felt uneasy because of your self-awareness. They didn't feel uneasy about losing you. They felt uneasy about being revealed next to you. Because when someone like you walks in, everyone's true nature shows. The imitators look obvious. The performers get loud. The authentic ones get quiet. The unsure ones get defensive. And the real ones feel seen. Because your presence feels like permission to be yourself. You are the blueprint in their story because you represent a level of self-authorship they've never reached. You don't perform, and that alone makes performers uneasy. You don't follow, and that makes followers spiral. You don't need validation, and that disrupts people who operate through approval. You don't hand out access. And that frustrates people who think proximity equals permission. They don't feel uneasy because of your past. They feel uneasy because of what your past built. They feel uneasy because you don't copy what works. You create what's true. They feel uneasy because you don't follow what's popular. You follow what's aligned. They feel uneasy because you don't get affected under pressure to conform. You strengthen. They feel uneasy because you walk through trend cycles like someone who's been themselves the entire time. And the most uncomfortable part for them, you see through everything. Not because you want to reveal them, but because you've met every version of pretend before. You know the performance. You know the borrowed confidence. You know the recycled personality. You know the curated image. And worst of all, you know when someone's performing versus being, you are not unreachable. You're incomparable. They've never met someone with your level of authenticity, self-awareness, originality, and groundedness in one quiet presence. And now they understand something they'll never admit. They weren't uneasy about losing you. They were uneasy about you showing them what authentic looks like. The interesting part about all of this, they were never uneasy about you being powerful. They were uneasy about you being real. As long as you performed like everyone else, they felt comfortable. As long as you followed the script, they felt stable. As long as you borrowed confidence, they felt superior. But the moment you started being undeniably yourself, the moment you stopped performing, the moment you stopped caring about fitting their mold, that's when everything shifted. That's why they watch now without speaking. That's why they whisper your name like a symbol, not a person. You didn't just level up, you became incomparable. You didn't just endure, you became the standard. You didn't just rise, you became the blueprint. And the truth is simple. They never felt uneasy about losing you. They felt uneasy about never becoming you. But now they're face to face with the original, the authentic you, the you who finally knows your own worth. And once you stand in that truth, you don't chase, you create. You don't follow, you lead. You don't copy, you originate. You don't ask for recognition, you become undeniable. If you ever saw yourself the way purpose sees you, you'd walk through every room like the original. They could never replicate. The one they can't copy. The one they can't replace. the one they can't misunderstand anymore. Because now they know. Now they see it. Now they feel it. You're not the blueprint in their story. You're the original in yours.